I am so glad that I get to kick off this series. Over the last several months, we've polled people in our small groups, in our core groups, and in men's ministry and women, and we asked in those surveys, and by the way, thank you for those who filled out those surveys. We actually do read them, and we asked in one of those, what are some things in which you would love the church to speak into your lives? And this was one of the highest on the list, this thing called margin, and we're gonna define it in the moment, but one thing Dawn said, where she said something, you might be in a small group where someone says something weird and it's only a 6-week commitment. I guarantee you, if you've ever been in a small group, someone's gonna say something weird, right? Like when are you even with your family or friends and someone doesn't say something weird and you go, oh man, that's Jerry, right? That's just Jerry. No, but we all know that when we are in a diverse community, man, you're going to get some weirdness, and God made us that way. Embrace the awkward. That's what life is about. Back to margin. Let me ask this. How many of us would say that we are very familiar and all too familiar in our lives with a thing called stress? Raise your hands, yeah. By the way, this is interactive, so I'm going to go for the raise hands, right? And you can handle it because just one, not two, because that's another denomination, but just one. So now, how many of us have gotten to a point where we go, I just need more hours in my day? How many of us have come to the end of the day and we actually have no bandwidth to have a meaningful conversation with a loved one other than pass out on your couch? Right? How many of us feel that when we look back on the last months or the last years, we clearly see that busyness has crept in and some of the most valuable things that we don't want to neglect have fallen to the wayside? This thing called margin is the space in our lives in which we breathe, and we all feel that we are driven to not even have time to breathe, let alone do all the things that we're called to do in life for a meaningful life. So just on Monday, I go into Cody's office. Cody is in our communications department. Anyone met Cody with glasses? That's what we call him, Cody with glasses, AKA Codfish. And Cody, I just go in there and I've got the stuff and we need to communicate. We need to send out emails. We need to do all kinds of things. And I just go, Cody, I have so many plates spinning right now that I'm afraid one could fall and break. I wouldn't even know, right? And I just kind of plopped down in this ugly little orange couch that's in his office. It's orange and velour, and you go, man, that looks cool, but it's really dirty and old. You wouldn't want to lick it, but it has this hipster look, to it. So you plop down in the orange. I go, I'm overwhelmed. And Cody goes, oh, me too. And then we laughed and we're like, good thing we're starting margin this week. And I'm preaching on it. So margin. Let's define what margin is, since we all think that we need some margin in our lives. Dr. Richard Swenson wrote a book a few years back called Margin. And he defines margin like this. It's the space between what we have and what is necessary. He also says it's the space between our load and our limits. Now this sounds crazy at first, but imagine this. It's the space between what you have and what is necessary. You have 30 minutes to get to a meeting. What is necessary is 20 minutes. It takes 20 minutes to get there. So margin is those 10 minutes, right? What you have is $100. You just got a bill for $75. So you have 100, what is necessary is 75, so you have a $25 margin right there. Margin, Dr. Swenson says, is something that we are now finding ourselves living without. That we have been driven to such a pace with progress, and progress is beautiful, but a symptom or a byproduct of progress that is unhealthy is that we in our lives have been driven to such an unsustainable rate that we actually have no margin. And what falls out of our margin are the most important things. And we're going to get to that, but this is what Dr. Swenson said. He says that overload is the majority experience in the West. And just to place you geographically, we're all in the West. So, overload is the majority experience in the West. He says this. He says, Overload, living a marginless life, is living at or past limits. And this is what it causes in your life. These are the symptoms: stress, complexity, speed, intensity, imbalance, neglect, overload. Can anyone relate with those things? Because we're in and we're driven in this culture, in this place, to live a marginless life. And we feel that we find our value by what we produce and by what we get done. And so we are driven to do more, get more, be more. And what we lose is what we were very designed for. Later in the sermon, we're gonna get to regrets of the dying. Yeah, Ryan's bringing up hot topics, right? But we're gonna see that if we are not careful, our days will burn by and we will miss the most important things. Dr. Swenson is a doctor, a physician. And over years and years, 20 years of studying this thing called margin, he saw that reliably bad things will happen to us if we have no margin. He was a physician, so he had people coming in all the time, dealing with symptoms and dealing with health that had been lost because of stress. Blood pressure was shooting up. Stress was doing crazy things to hormones in their bodies. Stress was having incredible physical fatigue. And then as he would interview patients like a good doctor does, he would see that relationships were breaking in their lives, between spouse, between family. Relationships at work, they were so overloaded that balls began to drop and their health was crumbling. We are driven to a marginless life in our culture by self and by society. However, God designed us for margin, to have space between what we have and what is necessary, to have space between our load and our limits. This is what happens when we don't have margin. Two things. When we do not have margin in our life, when margin decreases, stress increases. When margin decreases, stress increases. For example, let's go back to the driving thing, right? You have, the appointment is in 20 minutes and you know that it takes 15 minutes to get there, okay? So you get in the car, you're going, we're gonna have 5 minutes of flex time. I might even get there early, right? And then traffic hits, boom, 78, which man, I hate the 78. But okay, so it stopped. And now everyone in the world is against you and they're all driving bad and you're driving good. And they are keeping you because all of a sudden now your blood pressure is soaring. You got both hands on the wheel and you usually never drive like that. But now both hands are on the wheel because your margin is decreasing, your stress is increasing, your eyes are bugging out, the heat of your blood is in your head, you're turning on the AC and the world is against you. So when margin decreases, stress increases. When your financial margin, by the way, in the weeks to come, we're gonna hit schedule. We're gonna ask the question of this: do you control your schedule or does your schedule control you? We're gonna talk about financial margin, we're gonna talk about professional margin, and we're gonna talk about moral margin. But this area of financial margin, when margin decreases, stress increases, you know that when you're living on a budget, you've got it all under control, and then boom, transmission goes. Something happens, medical expense. All of a sudden, your margin has been taxed. Your margin decreases and your stress shoots through the roof. And you know these conversations at home, right? You know what this leads to. One of the major causes that leads to divorce are financial stress issues. And it's when there is no margin. And now how many of us would love to have money left at the end of the month, right? How many of us would love to have financial margin that not only do we have money left, but we have money to bless others with? How many of us would love to have hours in the day left over or in the beginning where we actually get to love God and love others and do something that gives you life, like surf or do your artwork or even read a book? Could you imagine having time in life to read a book? Okay, we desire margin, and this is the reason why. Because we were made for margin, and margin does not make itself. Now listen to this. The second thing, we talked about when margin decreases, stress increases. When margin decreases, relational intimacy decreases. The first thing that we get rid of in life when we lose our margins, when we are ran by busyness, is we lose the ability and the time and even the energy to love the ones that matter most. And we know this, and we see this, and we know that we don't want to live lives like that, but we make excuses for a season to get through, and then we realize that a relationship has had serious health issues because of our neglect, because we had no margin. We were made for margin, and margin does not make itself. Now, from the very beginning in the Old Testament, the oldest book in the Old Testament is Job. And there's a conversation where Job shares a perspective about our days on earth, right? This is what it says, Job 14:5. It says, the days of mortals are determined. In other words, your days are numbered. And you're going, thank you, Ryan, for this uplifting sermon. Okay, so your days are numbered. The days of mortals are determined. You have decreed, God, you have decreed the number of their months and have set limits they cannot exceed. Our days are numbered. We know that. We have a small limited time on earth. And God, there are limits that we cannot exceed. And if we exceed those limits, and Dr. Swenson says we're living in this society and this culture that says exceed your limits, there is damage and there is destruction when we exceed the limits that we were designed for. Psalm 90, Moses gives us this prayer to God. At the beginning of Psalm 90, Moses is saying, man, our life goes by so fast, it's like a watch in the night. In James chapter 4, he likens our lives as a vapor or a mist that's there in the morning and gone in the day, right? This is what Moses' prayer is. He says, God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. God, teach us to assess our time. Look at our time and give us a heart of wisdom to use that time wisely because it's gone like that. Life is short, we know that, but the days are long and we get sidetracked and we forget that we were made for margin. But we know that margin doesn't make itself. So I want to bring us to this. God modeled margin in creation. We see in Genesis as he goes through the whole Genesis account of creation. Every day after he made something, what did God do? He kicked up his feet and he looked back and he reflected and he said, by the way, this is a sweet ab workout right now. He said, this is good. At the end of the day, he reflected and he said, this is good. That was a daily model of margin. And then at the end of 6 days, on the seventh day, God did what? He rested. And he rested and he looked back and said, this is good. So God modeled this rest, this margin in life from the very beginning in a daily and weekly rhythm. And then later he saw that humanity clearly did not follow his model, right? So then he gave us these commandments in Exodus, and he says, here's these 10 commandments. I'm gonna give you just 10 laws to live by, okay? 10 out of everything. One of these is this, rest. So he gives us this law that says, work 6 days, sure. But on the seventh day, I want you to take a 24-hour period, a Sabbath, a rest. And I want you to do nothing. I want you not to work. I want you to be with me. I want you to spend time with God, and I want you to spend time with your family and friends. I even want you to give your horses and donkeys a break. So for all of you, your horses and donkeys need a break. They were designed for margin too. But God not only modeled margin in creation, but he mandated it for us. Now, I heard this phrase once, even though we're designed for margin, I heard this phrase that said, and I think it's an extrapolation from C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, which is a great read. But here's the saying. It says, if Satan can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. Because whether you're bad or busy, you're going to miss the life God designed you for. Now, that is saying being busy is is bad, right? Being busy can rule your life. Ken Blanchard calls it being under Satan's yoke. And I don't want to like spook you with all that, if that sounds funky language to you. But busyness, when it squeezes our lives, the things that pop out, the things that get left behind, the things that get neglected most, are the things that are most valuable to you. We were designed for margin, but margin does not make itself. We would all love to be conscious when we get home, to have a meaningful conversation with our spouse. We would love to have energy when we get home, to have time to hang out with our friends or to play with our kids. We would love to have margin in our finances, that we not only have enough to live on, but we also have enough to give when we see areas in which we can be a blessing to others. We all want margin, and we were made for it, but life fights against it. Now, making that point and seeing that God says, seeing that this prayer from Moses is that God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. I want to show you my marbles. Here you go. So I have a sweet marble collection. Not really, I'm not a marble collector. Not that I would be dissing those people or likening them to, radar detector people or, those, no, but remember that, yeah. Here, this is just a visual. Oftentimes, if we can't visualize the time that we have, we don't make use of the time that we have now. So here are 936 marbles. 936 marbles. Now, if you take, there's 52 weeks in a year. So if you take 52 weeks in a year, from 0 to 18, we have two kids. Rachel and I have two kids. Hudson, who's 6.5, Colton, who's 1.5, and think of Hudson. We want to seize this time with our kids, 18 years, right? 18 times 52 is 936, and someone's like, dude, what'd you bring me to, a mathematics seminar? What is this? No, but I'm going to give you a visual that 936 weeks with our kids from 0 to 18. This time goes by fast. This is what I love about being at a church. So many of you tell me all the time to seize this time because the time goes fast and your kids have already gone off to college and they're adults and now you've got grandkids. And I thank you for this wisdom. And 936 weeks goes by fast. Already, Hudson is 6.5. We are at 598 weeks now until Hudson reaches 18. And in fact, this Sunday is a weeks of 597, okay? Only at 6.5, this time flies by. And when we visualize the time that we have left, we take more advantage of the time that we have now. And clearly you can see that when our kids get all the way to 18 and you've burned through 936 weeks of seizing time with them, you lose your marbles. Yep. You've lost your marbles. And I get that advice from you guys too, right? And I see it in your faces. But time goes by fast. May our prayer be, when we have no margin, Lord, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And let us see that we were not only designed for margin, but margin does not make itself. And it creates effort in today's world to create margin for the things that matter most. And time flies. By the way, you can do this with 5-year goals. You can do this with your time in college. You can do this with the next 10 years of marriage. We're going to make weeks, and we don't want a week to go by where we miss out on connecting with each other. Visualize your time so that you take more advantage of the time that you have. Now, on another uplifting note, I want to talk about regrets of the dying. Okay, Bronnie Ware, she's a hospice nurse in Australia, and she wrote an article a time back that just went crazy, and it's in all these different languages now, and it's called The Top Regrets of the Dying, the top regrets of the dearly departing that will give us the eyes to seize life now so we don't end up at the end regretting the time that we've lost. Now, we are all here breathing today. So God is still giving us an opportunity, no matter where we're at, to seize the moments of our lives. And this is what the regrets are. I wish I had courage to live true to myself, lived up to my dreams, not the life others expected of me. How many dreams, they were reflecting on how many dreams went unfulfilled because they valued themselves according to others' opinions rather than what God was whispering into their hearts, saying, do this, spend time here, do this. The number one across the board, male and female, was this: I wish I didn't work so hard. That they missed their children's youth, their grandchildren's youth, their partnership, their spouse's companionship, their friendships, their closest friendships and family, because they were spending so much time on the treadmill of work existence. And at the end of their lives, they were like, that was a waste. And the thing that popped out of my marginless life were the ones that I loved most. They wish they had stayed in touch with their friends. And they wish that they had let themselves be happy. That they would have stopped wanting and driving for more and more and more, and just the next thing, and then I'll be happy, and just the next thing, and then I'll have time for my kids, just the next thing, and then I'll have time for my dream to do art or anything like that. They wish they would just stopped and chosen to be happy. Now, the reason why this is so uplifting is because sometimes we need to stop in our tracks and realize that days are going by. And God designed us for margin. Jesus, in his life, in just 3 years, transformed the world. And do you realize where we get most of Jesus' teaching? It's in the interruptions of his 3-year mission. That as he was going, he would get up early in the morning. He created margin to connect with God. He created margin to get tuned with God so that he would live an intentional day. And then you know what? He had a plan, and constantly along the way, people came into interaction with Jesus, and he stopped. He actually had time in life to stop and connect with another human, and that's where healings happen. That's when teachings happened. That's where love happened. And that is where God showed us his character in Jesus Christ, his son. It is in margin that we saw that. Now let me give you this verse, and then we're going to have a time of reflection. In Matthew 11, Jesus seems to understand where we're at, even though we're thousands of years later now, but his culture was the same. Jesus says this to you marginless people who really raise hands that want margin. He says, come to me, you who are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest, margin, space for your souls. How many of us need that? During these next 6 weeks, we challenge you to really assess the margin in your life or the lack thereof. You were made for margin, but margin does not make itself. The reason why we're saying get into a core group for 6 weeks is we're going to dive into every one of these areas. We're going to look at margin in our schedules next week. We're going to look at margin or lack thereof in our finances. We are going to look at margin or lack thereof in our moral lives, where you may be pushing right to the edge of what you know is right, and it is one step away from destruction, and what you need is margin. And we are also going to look at margin in our professional lives. And maybe we need to take a step back to actually listen to the God who whispers into our souls and made us for something. And if we're not connected to him, we can miss it. It is in margin that we meet with God and that we love others and that we live into the dreams he placed on our hearts. So now we're going to enter a time of just reflection. This is what I ask. I ask for you to think about your life and to think about, as you raised your hands, and we all wanted to, would you invite Jesus into your life to help you establish margin once again? I want you to think about what has happened, or maybe what has been neglected because of not having margin in your life. Do you even have emotional capacity to deal with the chaos that happens? Do you need financial margin? Do you need time margin, schedule margin? In Revelations 3:20, Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock. Will you let me in? I want to come in and dine with you, rest with you, recline with you. So close your eyes now. We're just going to have a time of music. Jesus is standing at the door knocking. Will you let him in, assess your margin or lack thereof, and ask yourself, what has been neglected because of living a marginless life?